Story number 1. Mrs. Thompson was kind of a mystery in our street. She lived alone and didn't talk to anyone. Lately, though, she started acting weirder, wandering around at odd hours, talking to herself. People whispered she had dementia or something. The Johnsons, being the nicest people on the block, decided to check on her one day. They asked me to join because I'm young and might help if there was any heavy lifting. I agreed, thinking it would be a quick visit. When we entered Mrs. Thompson's house, it was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with dust, and it felt like the house was stuck in time. Mrs. Thompson was sitting in her rocking chair, staring into nothing. While Mrs. Johnson made tea, Mr. Johnson and I decided to have a quick look around, make sure everything was safe. That's when we found it, a door, hidden behind a heavy curtain, locked tight. We asked Mrs. Thompson about it, but she just mumbled something about keeping it shut. My curiosity was piqued. I found some old keys on a rusty hook in the kitchen and started trying them one by one. After what felt like hours, one key clicked. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dusty room. It was like a time capsule. Old toys, a small bed, and photos on the walls. It looked like it belonged to a child. The air got colder as we stepped inside. Mr. Johnson picked up a photo, and his face went pale. It was a photo of a little boy, smiling, but the face, it was hauntingly familiar. It was Tommy, a kid from our neighborhood who went missing decades ago. The whole town searched for him, but he was never found. Mrs. Johnson gasped, dropping her tea. The sound of it shattering seemed to snap Mrs. Thompson out of her daze. She started screaming, telling us to leave the room, her eyes wild with fear. We backed out, closing the door behind us. Mrs. Thompson was shaking, tears streaming down her face. She started talking, her words spilling out in a rush. She told us Tommy was her grandson, that he used to visit her every summer. But one summer, something went wrong. She never explained what, just that he was gone, and she locked up his room to keep the memories in. We didn't know what to do. The room felt like a tomb, holding secrets of a past tragedy. The air was heavy with unspoken words and hidden truths. Mrs. Thompson begged us not to tell anyone, her voice breaking with each word. We left the house, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of that room, the feeling of stepping into a forgotten part of someone's life. The next day, Mrs. Thompson was found in her garden, motionless. It was like she had given up on life the moment her secret was out. The authorities came, but they never found anything conclusive. The room was empty when they checked it. No toys, no photos, nothing. Like it never existed. Story number 2. I never thought my boring life in our sleepy town would turn into a scene from a thriller movie. But here I am, hiding in my room, writing this down just in case. It all started about a week ago. My room is right next to the thin wall we share with the neighbors, the Sebastians. They're this quiet, kind of weird couple. I never paid them much mind until that night. I was trying to sleep when their voices seeped through the wall. It was Mr. Sebastian's voice, hushed but frantic. "We can't keep doing this. It's getting too risky." I know I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear more. Mrs. Sebastian's voice was calmer, almost cold. "We don't have a choice. It's done. We move on with the plan." Plan? What plan? My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to convince myself they were talking about some boring adult stuff, but their tone, it was sinister. The next few days, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I started noticing little things. The way they hurriedly closed their garage as soon as they drove in. The late-night digging sounds in their backyard. And then, the big red flag. They even park it outside their house, unloading boxes at midnight. I decided to do a bit more snooping. I know it's wrong, but I had to know what was up. I waited until it was late and they were likely asleep. I crept outside, using the shadows to hide. My heart raced, and my hands were all sweaty. As I got closer to their backyard, I heard a muffled sound, like someone crying? My blood ran cold. I peered over the fence, and there it was. A hole, maybe a grave, and next to it, those boxes from the van. Panicking, I rushed back to my room, my mind racing. Were the Sebastians criminals? What were in those boxes? Was someone in danger? I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next day, I decided to keep an eye on the Johnsons. I skipped school, pretending to be sick. I watched from my window as they left the house together. This was my chance. I sneaked into their backyard. The hole was now filled, but the dirt looked freshly turned. My hands shook as I started digging. I had to know what was buried there. I was halfway through when I heard a voice behind me. "What do you think you're doing?" I spun around. It was Mr. Sebastian, his face twisted in anger. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. I heard something, thought it was a dog, stuck," I stammered. He didn't buy it. He grabbed my arm, his grip iron tight. "You're coming with me." He dragged me inside their house. I tried to fight, but he was too strong. Inside, Mrs. Sebastian waited, her expression unreadable. "We can't let him go," she said quietly. "He knows too much." My heart sank. This was it. I was in deep trouble. Mr. Johnson's eyes softened a bit. "Kid, we're not going to hurt you, but you need to understand, this is bigger than you." They explained then. They weren't criminals, but undercover agents. The boxes, the hole, the late-night activities, it was all part of a sting operation to catch a major crime syndicate. The digging sound? They were planting surveillance equipment. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I thought they were the bad guys, but they were actually trying to stop the real bad guys. And I had almost messed it all up. They made me promise not to tell anyone, for my safety and theirs. As I left their house, my head spinning, I realized how quickly I had jumped to conclusions, how dangerous curiosity could be. But I was also relieved. Relieved that I wasn't living next to criminals, and relieved that I was out of danger. Or so I thought. The very next day, the real twist came. I overheard the Sebastians again, but this time their tone was different. They were arguing, and one phrase caught my attention. "The kid knows too much. He could ruin everything." That's when it hit me. They weren't undercover agents. That was just another lie, a cover story to keep me quiet. Now I'm really in trouble. I don't know who they are or what they're planning, but I know I'm in their way. I'm writing this down as a record, just in case something happens to me. I wish I had minded my own business. Now I'm caught in this dangerous game, not knowing whom to trust, and every creak in the house, every shadow makes my heart race. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm scared. Really scared. Story number 3. I moved into this new house with my family a few months ago. It's a cozy place, not too big, not too small, just perfect for us. We were excited about the fresh start, but little did we know that our lives were about to take a twisted turn. It all started one evening when we found an envelope in our mailbox. There was no return address, just a plain white envelope with "To the new residents" written on it in shaky handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it, and I wish I had never laid eyes on the contents. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a message typed out. It read, "Welcome to the neighborhood. I hope you enjoy your new home. I'll be watching." I showed the letter to my parents, thinking it was some sort of sick joke, but their faces turned pale, and they exchanged worried glances. We couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, observing our every move. The next day, another letter arrived. This time, it described in detail what we had for dinner the previous night. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the words. "I saw you all sitting down for a nice family dinner. The lasagna looked delicious." We searched the entire house, but there was no sign of anyone. We called the police, but they couldn't find any evidence of a break-in. We were trapped in a nightmare, with no way to escape. Weeks went by, and the letters kept coming. They described our daily routines, what we wore, what we watched on TV, and even the private conversations we had in the living room. It was as if this watcher had eyes everywhere. My family grew increasingly paranoid. We started closing all the curtains and blinds, but it didn't make us feel any safer. Every noise outside became a potential threat, every shadow a potential stalker. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I stayed up late, hoping to catch a glimpse of the watcher. I peered through the curtains, trying to see anyone lurking in the darkness. Hours passed, and my eyelids grew heavy, but I refused to give in to sleep. Then, just before dawn, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing across the street, partially hidden behind a tree. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was them. The Watcher. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my phone and called the police. I gave them a description of the figure, but by the time they arrived, the Watcher was gone. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The police promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood, but they couldn't offer much more help. We were on our own, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. As the weeks turned into months, the letters continued. The Watcher seemed to know everything about us, our fears, our weaknesses. They would leave notes that said things like, "I know you're afraid of the dark," or "You should lock your bedroom door at night." And it was clear that the Watcher was trying to drive us mad, to tear our family apart. But we refused to let them win. We stuck together, determined to uncover their identity. We installed security cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Watcher's face. We kept a vigilant watch, taking shifts to stay awake at night. We even hired a private investigator, but they couldn't find any leads. One night, as I was watching the security footage, I saw something that sent chills down my spine. The camera had captured a figure standing in the backyard, wearing a hooded jacket and a mask. It was the Watcher, and they were getting closer. I woke up my family, and we decided to confront the Watcher together. We armed ourselves with baseball bats and flashlights and cautiously made our way outside. But when we reached the backyard, there was no one there.